First video in Massachusetts, and we're checking out Williamstown. Welcome zombies. Please remember to share these videos with other zombies because we're looking at leftovers, remnants of previous advanced prosperous civilizations, our ancestors in these lands that we just haven't really been told about. But they were here and we're exploring some of their stuff. So today we're specifically looking at Williamstown, Massachusetts. I think we're also going to take a little bit of a look at Adams, Massachusetts, but there'll also be a video coming up. Let's see, is it I think the next one? Yeah, the next one and the one after. I think I'm going to spend both of them in Adams and North Adams, Massachusetts. From the airship here. So we're in the top left corner of Massachusetts. That would be like the northwestern corner of Massachusetts here. I know a lot of us know Boston, Massachusetts. That's all the way over here on the east side of Massachusetts, basically on the eastern shoreline. But we're all the way up in this top corner, basically in Vermont. And I mentioned this earlier, but the reason I ended up here is because I found an Airbnb right here in Reedsboro, and so I did a little bit of driving around, spent some time here in Massachusetts, Bennington, Vermont. If you haven't watched that video, go watch that video. See that big obelisk there in that picture? I talk a whole lot about ancient obelisks all over America in that video. In Vermont, I also went up into more northern Vermont, checked out the capital city. I checked out Royalton and Sharon, Vermont, and a historical site there that I just lots of cool stuff in Vermont. But being there in Vermont, I was so close to Massachusetts, and just driving around, I also came across Williamstown. Williamstown was originally called West Hoosac, and we will be looking at the Hoosac River also today, because wow, definitely worth showing that, a little bit of that. And we're dealing again with another fort. I've touched on forts in various videos, but specifically New York, I spent a little bit of time, a bit more time talking about forts and star forts and how amazing of rock ancient structures those actually are, and not what it's trying to tell us right here, where Fort West Hoosac, the westernmost blockhouse and stockade. Now right off the top, I didn't really know exactly what blockhouse and stockade is. If we do a little hover, okay, showing a blockhouse as a small fortification made out of wood, basically just looks like a wood cabin. And a stockade, same thing, they're just showing it as walls of twigs, basically, which these basically I'm not convinced any fort they ever talk about is the wood stuff that they show. And there's plenty of reason for that, because all the evidence and pictures and everything just show that These are rock castle fortresses. And I say this in a lot of my videos, but in order to build these super tall, extremely durable and strong rock castle fortresses, yes, you have technology, yes, you have vehicle transportation, all that sort of stuff. And not only, and then we've also been fed the narrative of like, okay, the people that did build castles and castle kingdoms, they didn't know how to flush, they didn't know how to run water, they didn't know how to do sewage, they didn't know how to flush their poop out of the building. And yes, they did. If you look at just old ancient architecture, they did water probably way better than we do, and ran canals and waterways and had boats and all. They had it all, guys. We're not the most advanced. Our ancestors were more advanced. We've just been fed a story that we are, but we're not. And if that just sounded like a complete load of BS to you, then I highly encourage you to go back, to watch my videos, the videos on this channel. And I recommend for anybody that you watch the videos in order, starting with episode 1, because there's a lot of just learning as we go here, and there's definitely plenty of stuff that I'm not taking time to go over again in each and every video. And I promise, if you spend the time watching them, you're gonna learn so much, and you'll understand that what I just said is accurate. And a lot of our rivers are exactly that. They're the leftovers of previous canals, previous waterways that our ancestors built. And this one's, there's, I don't know, this one's a pretty good example. There's maybe some better ones, but this one's pretty good, the Hoosac River. And what it says about it is it can be translated either as the beyond place or as the stony place. Perhaps because the river's stony bottom is usually exposed, and because local soils are so stony. The reason everything's so stony is because our ancestors, the people, the advanced prosperous civilizations that lived here before us, built out of rock. They built their canals out of rock, they built their buildings out of rock. And so when we're looking at an old river that's super stony and soil that's very stony, it's because this old river is an old canal that they built out of stone. The soil is sitting on top of stone because there's been floods that have buried tons of their buildings and old architecture, and they built everything out of stone. So there's all stone, and then new floods leave new soil and new earth, and underneath all that is a lot of stone. And same goes for a lot of our mountains that have been covered up with dirt and a little bit of new shrubbery on top of them. Just their old stone structures that have been covered up. And this is a picture right here of the upstream Hoosac River. And if we look at this section of the Hoosac River, we can see plenty of evidence of ancient rock, canalway, got some ancient pillars over here supporting a bridge. And let me just flash this photo on the screen and give you an idea of like how much of America has actually been buried, with just some of it still poking up. And even to the point where a lot of our bridges are leftovers. And the reason that so much could be buried and there's still waterways up here with bridges is because that's how they built. I mean, their stuff was so tall, they had bridges and waterways very, very high up. And so when most of that got buried, we're still left with a little bit of their stuff poking up, even bridges and waterways. And another thing I want to show you is, so here's Williamstown again. If we look down just a little bit at this mountain range, we'll call it, which in this case is just old rock structure built by previous ancestors, and I'll show you. We look right here, this is Mount Greylock, which is now a state reservation. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But if I zoom in right here, we can see that there's a huge tower, and I'll show you some more shots of this, sitting right on top of this supposed mountain, as we call it. And Mount Greylock is another war memorial. Same story we saw in Bennington, Vermont, with that insane obelisk that's clearly ancient. Cowboys didn't build that. They'd have no business building that, and likely would have no way of actually building something like that. And it's just leftovers that are turned into named war memorials. Same thing right here. We've got another tower that's been named a war memorial. This Mount Greylock State Reservation was created in 1898 as Massachusetts' first public land for the purpose of forest preservation. The reason that this forest is being preserved is not because of the shrubbery that's there, because frankly, the shrubbery is very new and very little compared to what would actually be a real forest of trees and growth that have been there for a very long time that we actually might want to preserve. In this case, it's all brand new life because that new dirt and shrubbery and plant life has just been placed there, or is there, covering up a previous structure that was made from previous civilizations, and for that reason the GOV is protecting it. As we can see right here, here's a view of the Mount Greylock range. And this is what I mean. There's some green stuff on there, but it's very new green stuff. I mean, when trees have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, they grow very tall. This is not a whole lot of years. And there are definitely ancient structures, rock structures, sitting underneath this little bit of dirt and new growth of shrubbery. Okay, and we'll look at some more pictures of this, but here's a look at what they call the Veterans War Memorial Tower, but this is a leftover tower from ancient peoples, and that's why it looks exactly like that. Got all the ancient eagles on here, ancient ribbons, just ancient decoration, ancient rock stacking. We've got these little slits in it, just like we see on obelisks, like the one in Bennington, and in large part these are I believe energy towers, and I talk a lot more about that in the Bennington, Vermont video. And I'm sure these slits in the rocks have something to do with that. And then it's got this really unique light fixture, let's call it, here on top. And this is what they give us as a picture for a renovation that they did on it in 2016. And I think that's probably true. This looks, like renovation. The structure's clearly already there, already built, and there's just scaffolding wrapped around it for them to, I don't know, I didn't read too deep into what renovations they were doing, but to do whatever renovations they were doing. Now this is the point I want to make here, is this looks exactly like mini construction photos that we see of a lot of the ancient architecture I point out. They show exactly this. They show the structure fully built with some scaffolding around it, and they call it construction. They call it this is it being built from the ground up. When right here we're seeing this is renovation. And specifically I can think of the Trilon in New York, and in my Bennington, Vermont video, I talk a lot about the Trilon and Perisphere. The Trilon's a huge obelisk that used to be in New York, no longer there, they took it down, but in the construction photos you see of it, this is what they give you. You can find some where it's fully built and you just see some scaffolding around it. And I mentioned in that video that it would actually be very easy to, and like I said, they took that one down. And so, like I said, it would be very easy to, during a renovation or during an actual deconstruction, a tearing something down, if you threw up scaffolding while you're doing that, or even just while you're tearing it down, you could just retitle the image and say, this is a construction photo, even though it's a deconstruction photo. And this is a lodge on the structure. That's just all made out of rock. That's a terrible photo. I'll show you some better ones, but this is also on top of Mount Greylock. And I thought this was particularly interesting. I'll explain why, but it says that the mountains here, okay, so Mount Greylock and the neighboring Taconic Mountains are comprised predominantly of phyllite, a metamorphic rock, overlain on young layers of metamorphized sedimentary rock, especially marble. So they're saying that underneath this is marble. And I'll show you right here even, but especially in my North Adams, Massachusetts videos, I'll spend a lot more time on this. I went to a marble dam and canal, which is clearly man-made. And that's what I'm gonna claim here, is that all of this is man-made. And when they say there's marble under here, yeah, it's because, like I said, how stuff's buried, their previous structures are buried. They built all this out of marble. Very beautiful temples, pyramids, architecture out of marble that's currently covered up and is now a mountain with an underlying layer of marble that Mother Nature just built naturally, according to the story. But I'm going to show you, there's full-blown canals and dams made of marble, clearly man-made, and that's what we're seeing here. This whole mountain range is just marble structures built by our ancestors. If you're familiar with these videos and the stories that were told on all this ancient architecture, you'll be aware, I mean, there has to be a fire or flood in this story, right? And guess what? You're not going to be disappointed. There is. And so it says, during the 19th century, much of the mountain was denuded by logging, fires, and grazing. Forests have since reclaimed the mountain. I'm just going to say, these are their old structures. These are old structures built by humans out of marble. And yeah, since the 1800s, there's been disaster, and so to speak, and they've been covered up now. But if you were to go excavate all these mountains, you would find ancient man-made structures. But you can't, because it's under forest preservation. Fires and or floods, and then that gives the perfect excuse for the GOV to come in and cop it and control it. And so that's what we see right here. And sometimes, you know, some millionaires built it or owned it or whatever and then just donated it to the GOV. It's usually either one of those or maybe a little mixture of the two. In this case, we're going to see a little mixture. By the late 19th century, logging practices had stripped much of the mountain. Logging practices had stripped much of the mountain for local industries that produced wood products. So also, again, we're seeing here a lot of woodworking going on, you know, and that's the story we've been told. There's dirt roads and wood cabins, but what's the deal with all the rock architecture that we're seeing? And I'm not just talking about the mountains here. We'll actually look at all the buildings that are made out of rock. So there were devastating forest fires and landslides. Following a fire on the summit, a group of local businessmen concerned about the mountain incorporated the Greylock Park Association and purchased 400 acres on the summit. So fire happens and a bunch of super rich businessmen get together and go, we're so concerned about this mountain, we really want to preserve it, so let's just go buy it all. But then the GPA goes into debt, and conservation interests in the state sought to protect the mountain through other means. Legislation was filed to transfer the land holdings of the mountain to state reservation, to the GOV. So there's the story. Fire, millionaires go and buy it, and then basically it gets donated to the GOV. And that's how the GOV owns this whole mountain area. And you can't really do anything other than just go hike around it a little bit and ski on it. I guess you can go ski on this one also. And they're going to tell us that the tower on the summit was constructed 1931 to 1932, and the lodge, which is made out of all rock, was built in 1932 to 1938. And I'll show you this little 1753 house when I show you some footage that I got of the area, but nothing about this thing makes sense, and they even say this is just a replica in the first place. Right here, 1753 house is a historical replica of a regulation settler's home in this area. I thought this was funny because it says the house was originally intended as a temporary exhibit, but it has remained a Williamstown landmark due to its popularity. All right, I was there walking around for a couple hours. No one cared to really go look at this thing. I was probably the only one who did go look at it. So this isn't some like, oh, it's super popular. And it says it again right here. It's a popular destination for locals and tourists alike. It's not that popular, but it's there just to serve their story of Oh no, these were cabin people, poor cabin wood people. When we're gonna look at all this architecture, and some of it, a lot of it is just clearly castles. Straight castle, leftover castle architecture from previous civilizations that knew how to build extremely well. Okay, and I said I mentioned the Hoosac tunnel. It says at its completion, the tunnel was the world's second longest after the 8.5 mile tunnel, Mont Cenis tunnel, through the French Alps. So let's look at a picture of the Mont Cenis tunnel real fast, and look at that. And what we're gonna see is not really too different than that. And it says it was the longest tunnel in North America until 1916 completion of the Connaught tunnel. All right, so let's look at that. Here's the Connaught tunnel. Here's another look at this Connaught tunnel. I'll show you some more pics, but here's the ones they give us on the wiki page where, yeah, I mean, this is just, okay, a new cheap looking date has been slapped on very old looking ancient rock. And then they also, I would love to go see these, but they also say that there were, the story they give for these is there were a bunch of towers also placed along the railroad that they say they built these towers to look and make sure that things were aligned. These are just old ancient towers that have been left over that used to be alongside the railroad. Here's another picture. They call this the East Portal in 1915, showing, they call it the test section at the left. So this is supposedly a test section, and then this is the actual one. And I think maybe I don't know the full story here, but I'm not sure what a test, I don't know, but look, it's just lumber. We're seeing lumber everywhere. They're little wood carts, but somehow they managed to put perfect rock stacked tunnels and arches with apparently mountains right on top of them. They did all that with their wood and logs. And the rocks looks brand new too, right? Like they just barely threw that up freshly. No, it looks like it's been there for a very, very long time and has taken a beating, because that's the case. And surprise, Hoosac is an Algonquian word meaning place of stones. So again, another name for this area where it's just saying it's all stone. And our ancestors, ancient people, they built out of all stone. I found the technology section to be an interesting read. So the tunnel construction project required excavation of 2 million tons of rock. 2 million, they excavated 2 million tons of rock. This is funny. On March 1853, Wilson's patented stone cutting machine, a tunnel boring machine, was used. It failed after excavating 10 feet of rock. So they've got to excavate 2 million tons. Then it does say tunnel builders, okay, after that, the tunnel builders resorted to hand digging. And then later, they used the Burley drilling machine, pneumatic drill. And then they say it also featured the first large-scale commercial use of nitroglycerin and electric blasting caps. And even if that's true, all that's saying is they just started blowing stuff up. You can't make those perfect arches and everything if you're just blasting stuff. So I find this story very fishy. And then like I said about the towers, it says the alignment towers served to make sure the tunnel stayed true to its course. And of course, this story wouldn't be complete without a fire, so let's see what they have to say about fire. A candle in the hoist building ignited fumes that had leaked from a gasometer lamp. So there's a lamp that's leaking fumes, a candle lights it on fire, an ensuing explosion set the hoist on fire, and it collapsed into the shaft. I think even in lots of cases, trains were already here, and we just had to figure out how to clear the tracks and tunnels and turn them on and get them going. And that's what this looks like right here. Like this, again, does not look like new rock that has just been put up. There's so much weathering being shown on this rock. And all this dirt right here, like, does not make sense for how much rock we see right here. And each one of these stones is just massive, extremely, extremely heavy. And these people just look like they're posing with something they just discovered recently. Here's another look at a piece of it where we see another beautiful arch with, honestly, different design. It's kind of hard to tell, but it almost looks like there's different design in the brick or the rock right here. And it just looks like it's been destroyed, like a whole bunch of different new earth and rock right here. And it doesn't look like it's newly built. This one's interesting. It looks like they've got lumber running everywhere. I would imagine just, you know, they're using what they can to get this massive rock tunnel back in shape to be able to use it a little bit. If we look at the rock down here at the bottom, again, this is not newly placed rock. This is old rock that's endured weathering and disaster. Here's another piece along the tunnel. I forget exactly what they said this was. I'll probably see a note on it later and mention it. And here's a look inside the tunnel. And this might be the most telling of all, because look at how big these stones are in here, how old and weathered they are. Nothing about this is even close to having been laid any time recent. And this huge stone switches to this old burnt up brick right here, but everything's still perfectly arched, perfect tunnel. This is how ancient people built.
Well, it was in my childhood days, oh Lord, many long years ago. Now with the Spirit, now of my Savior, I was filled, Lord, filled, oh, in
this building's amazing. We've got the ancient triangle shape right there, the pillars, ancient pillars supporting it, ancient design right here along like the edges of it. And you can't really see it in this photo, but I imagine that that's brick. And I'll show you a lot of these buildings in a second, how they look now currently. Here's this guy, piece of a castle, still poking up. And you can see right here how buried it is. You know, we've got like entire levels of this thing still buried. So in Williamstown, there's a college, and that's mainly what I'm gonna show you when I show you the footage that I got, is the college that's there, because its architecture is just insane. And these are some of the buildings that are sitting there. This one's supposedly a congregational church, all made out of rock. They've got white siding over all this one. I really explained that one really well in my Ohio playlist, in my Ohio videos. But this is just, they just cover up the original rock structure with a bunch of white panels, but it's just that, it's rock or stone underneath there. And again, it's got a huge tower steeple on it, that ancient triangle and pillars, perfect arches. And I would imagine that these doors were actually just windows. You know, this is a very top piece of the building, probably not where people would enter, and those would probably have just been windows. This one's really cool. They call this one the fraternity house, I guess. They call this the Hopkins Hall. This is the Hopkins Observatory, they call it. And I imagine there was something much more on top of here, another like huge steeple or much more to the tower or something like that. Jessup Hall. And this thing looks really cool. Very cool. Huge arch right here. Imagine that's, again, a window that we've turned into a doorway, something like that. On dirt roads, there's a little bit of grass right here maybe, but again, like all this rock and everything, and just, you're not paving roads, you're just doing it all on dirt. I highly doubt it. And we can see these little towers up here, which very likely are energy towers. And this was the main one that really blew my mind there, cause it's such a castle. Like for real, it's just such a leftover of a castle. Looks exactly like it, cause that's exactly what it is. And again, we see the dirt roads, we see, you know, the uneven slope to the ground, burying different parts of the building. And what's also interesting, a little connection I guess I just made, is this shape of a design. I've been noticing this here in California on like the mission homes, for example. And here they just paint it white. This, they've left the rock fully exposed, but out here they'll paint it white. And just more evidence of ancient civilization, and the same ancient civilization spread out all across the land, building the same type of architecture out of rock from the west coast to the east coast and everywhere in between, and also north and south. And this one, they call this the St. John's Episcopal Church. This one, I believe, pretty much looks the same. I don't even think this picture is probably that old. The Thompson Memorial Chapel. I'll show you more of this one. The tower on it's pretty insane. And again, this is just the barely tippity top of it. So imagine how tall the thing actually was. Start right here with this just massive, what they call mill. Just a mill, but look how long this is, and it's all one structure, all made out of brick. It's like several blocks of just perfectly stacked brick. And this is where I'm saying, like, yo, take a small slice of this building, take that brick and make a road for yourself. But never, it's just always dirt roads. And that's because these buildings were already here. New earth came in, floods, and settled and buried pretty much most of these buildings and left a new layer of dirt on top of everything. And that's why we see pictures of dirt roads and these buildings just already there in perfectly built. The story's saying they're new, but they look super old because they are super old. They've just been buried, and new dirt roads are now in front of them. And just completely out of use. This building they don't even use anymore, because, yo, imagine, you saw how long this is? Imagine how much power and electricity that you'd have to pay to, it's just very expensive to keep this thing running. So instead, because we don't do wireless and technology and wireless towers like they used to, instead, now we've got our conquerors, our rulers, measuring all our use and charging us for electricity and power and energy. And so these huge structures, you gotta either get really, really creative to have a way to fund powering them, or they just sit in ruins like we see right here. Okay, I've mentioned this in several of my videos up until this point. I'm glad we're finally here, because this was really interesting, and I was actually able to talk with some of the people that volunteer here and learn a little bit more about it. But this is a cemetery, specifically an entrance right here to a cemetery that's on the National Register of Historic Places. That's clearly just ancient architecture. They're saying 1798. It's much older than that. I guess maybe 1893 is what they're saying for this building right here. But this is just old granite, perfectly stacked, and then you can see on the inside there's brick on the interior of the granite. And so I actually talked to one of the workers there at the cemetery.
That thing probably weighs 500-600 pounds.
You know, he gave me the same story as we've read several times in these videos, where some rich guy donates money and the state ends up owning it, that sort of a thing. And yeah, so there was, I guess, a fund set up that a rich guy set up apparently back in the mid-1800s that they supposedly still draw on to keep this cemetery maintained. But I thought even more interesting than that was I got to talk to him a little bit about how heavy some of this stuff is and how they move it around, and how the heck did they move it around back in the 1800s. And he's just like, I don't know how the heck they would have done it back then, because we sure have a heck of a time trying to move some of this stuff around. And then I kept driving and I saw this guy. So I don't know if we're quite in Williamstown yet, but if not, we're definitely close to it. But I saw this ancient brick building sitting over there, so I thought I'd have a little look at it. And I also saw this church along the way, another perfectly stacked brick structure right there with the top of the tower has definitely been knocked off of it. But I made it to that old brick structure building that I was showing you, and look at how detailed the brickwork here is at the top, and the arches along the windows, and these brick towers are just, and you can see right here plenty of this structure is just buried. Like right there at the bottom you can see just a full arch that's buried, and you can see we've added in some wood steps, a little wood bridge there that the original builders of this building would have never done out of wood. They just would have done it out of rock. But that's us forming some little connection out of wood. This here was a really cool church with a huge rose window. And then here's where I'm really in the Williams College area, Williamstown College area, whatever they call it. And this was the observatory that I showed you in one of the oldies but goodies picture, where it's clearly just old rock structure, and whatever was on top there was a much higher steeple, tower, dome that's just been chopped off, and then you got a little observation deck up there now, which is actually where I filmed the intro to this video from. And then across the way there's this building where it's super cool. You can see all the rock on the bottom with the beautiful tall windows. I've been trying to kind of just think about this more, because I find this, not a lot, but I've seen it several times where we've turned it into stairs, but the stairs are obviously new when the rock on the outside is obviously much, much older. And to me, I actually think, and I don't really know this for sure at all, but I think that might have been like a waterfall, honestly. And then it's just been dried up and we turned it into a set of stairs. But I think, like I said, at the tops of these old structures, they were absolutely still, even at the very tops, running water. And they love to run water outside because that's a smart thing to do for several reasons, but I won't really get into that right now. But I think this could very easily be just like a little waterfall that was built right here, and clearly, you know, there's much more of it buried in the ground, and maybe this structure over here had something to do with that. I don't know. And you know, I'd imagine this is all like what we're seeing, this little mound area buried over here, because this rock is exactly the same as the rock there on the observatory. So I imagine this is really just all one structure, but we've got a little bit of a hill, some dirt there, and grass covering up the actual piece of the building that would be connecting the two right there. Here's a look at it from the other side, and you can see a little stairway going up there. Right there on that little deck is where I filmed the intro from. I couldn't get up here. The door was locked right there, but yeah, pretty cool. And then you can see this building from the side, how old and weathered it looks. And then next to that building, just another huge brick building. And I'll just pan around and just more and more brick. And then it's interesting because there's these entryway pillar types of things that are clearly just like facade pieces that have been slapped on. And when that was, you know, no clue there. You know, was it the exact same time as when the brick building was built? I don't know, but they're marble and they're old and weathered as well. I know we've kind of been trained to like really only like stuff that's new and that looks new. And lots of times these brick buildings are old and weathered and don't look new. And so we kind of think they're crap, but that's not the case at all. The fact that they're still standing there after so many years is the proof that they're amazing architecture. You know, there's the aesthetic design of it, but to be able to create brick that's strong and stack it so perfectly and still have it be there after all this time, that is proving that this is amazing architecture, strong, durable architecture. And the dirtiness on it is proving that it's gone through a lot of weathering, meaning that it is very old, and it's also very strong and durable. And I can't wait to show you guys some stuff I found in Middle America, like Kansas, for example. There's one place specifically I stayed in Kansas where I talked to the landlord, and that's the exact conversation we had, because she was like, her and her husband bought the building and then rented it out on Airbnb, and she started saying like, yeah, it's kind of an older building or whatever. And I was like, yeah, but that's the proof that it's an amazing, strong building, that you're not gonna have to worry about like getting injured by weather or anything like that, because it's already been sitting here for a super long time and it's in that great of condition. And it's proof that these buildings are built very, very well, and that we don't build buildings that well anymore. We're much more cheap and disposable, and frankly, for the most part, we're still just building wood cabins, just with shinier paneling on the outside of them, but we're still building out of lumber, maybe a little bit of concrete for the foundation, and then maybe if we're putting up skyscrapers, like now we're doing a whole bunch of steel and glass. But their skyscrapers, like our ancient ancestors, some of the stuff that I'm showing in these videos, was perfect rock stacking, extremely heavy stone all the way up for their skyscrapers. Our skyscrapers are cheap steel and glass, and you can even read about it in lots of studies and reports and just like building collapses and stuff, where they cut a lot of corners even just to save money. It's like in this architecture that we're seeing, people, they weren't cutting corners, and they weren't being cheap about stuff, and they weren't being as fast as possible about stuff. It was, let's build this the best we can, the most beautiful we can, out of the best, strongest, most durable materials that'll last a very long time. Panning over from that side, we can start to see this type of white stone, maybe granite you'd call it, rock castle architecture, and then that huge tower across the street, which, like I said, it hasn't changed much from the earlier pictures we can find of it. But I have shown this in other videos where on top there was even much more steeple or tower shooting up, but it's been taken off. And so taking a look at the side of, I don't remember exactly what building this is, but right there, the tower on the left, the top of it gone, been squared off at the top. On this building over here, we've got a small gold dome. We've definitely seen much bigger gold domes, but a gold dome on top of that tower next to this huge church right here with just one of the most amazing towers, just really, really cool. And all the fine detailed decoration on it, really excessive for Cowboys, I'd say. And then here's another look, continuing to look at this castle right here. And if we look at this hill in front of it, again, I think this is just more of the structure that's just been covered up with dirt and grass. But I imagine if you uncovered all this, it'd just be more of these buildings right here. This one's super cool. Look at in between the windows right here are brick pillars, a bunch of little skinny brick pillars. And then down here, this section's all stone with perfect arches. I just think this building's very, very cool. And then over here, you've got this circular tower. And right here, you can see a little gargoyle animal type of thing right there. Again, just insanely excessive for dirt roads and Cowboys. Here's another little look at it. Some sort of bird sticking its tongue out. And here's another just big brick building, like 4 stories high right there, on top of a little hill that's surely covering up more building. And I pan across and we just see more and more and more brick buildings. And then here's that church that they just threw white siding over, which is a real shame. Surely another amazing rock structure, stone, brick, something like that. And then I just thought it was funny, I find it humorous, when they've just got this little wood bench right here sitting in the middle of all of this massive, perfect, ancient rock castle architecture. And maybe it's not so funny, because maybe it's just more of like a, hey, look how stupid you all are for believing our wood story narrative and not knowing any better. Here's an entrance to one of the buildings. I just really like the marble, and then you can see the little like longhorn depictions in there. Another piece of marble right here on top of some super old brick. Here's a look at that whole building, and look at this, just levels shooting under the ground. And then when you look at the brickwork on these couple buildings, it's pretty crazy. You can see that there again with that angle of a triangle on the building, and then this one over here, just how it's all, they not only stack it all perfectly to form a super strong structure, but then the way they create design and how they're laying the brick is really cool. And these what we'd call chimneys, but like, I don't know, I don't think they're just burning logs and those are to let the smoke out. And then it has the green accenting on it, and some of its shields, like as you can see over there on the right, got a certain type of shield with a sword on it. You have to be so like just so beyond expert in bricklaying and constructing buildings out of brick that I don't know if we could really do this today. Like exactly like this, as thick as this is, as big as this is, with all that detail and design. Throwing some yellow brick in the mix here with some gray stone on the bottom. And there's a lot to look at on this one. So right away we can see the building goes down much deeper, and there's that gray stone on the bottom of it. Perfect yellow brick everywhere. And then the decorations above the windows, you know, that's ancient giveaway right there. These huge pillars out front here. And I thought these windows at the top were really interesting. So the ones on the sides have that angle of triangle. It looks like there was a torch right there in the middle that's been removed. But that middle one's got more of like a curvy design to it. There's this one right here, more huge pillars, ancient triangle, perfectly laid brick, ancient design over the windows, and then another castle structure. And so the tower on this one right here, I almost want to say this little piece right here is new, and there was a much bigger piece of this tower sitting on top. Could be wrong on that, I don't know. Here's a look at it from the side. Really amazing. It's interesting to see the brick alternating with this darker stone, and then that leads into this much wider stone.
On a journey, moving over rocks, God knows and real, to that little of that old church house out on a hill. Well, when that old-fashioned preacher, oh Lord, give out the me to him, then every heart breaks down with the Holy Ghost. Oh, would feel, oh Lord, oh, would feel, well,
Okay, and here's where I'll show you that cabin I was talking about that sits in the middle of all this ancient rock castle architecture. And then dink, here's our little wood cabin, just so you know what the story is here. Wood cabin people built all this, not advanced ancient rock building fortress civilizations. But yes, that is who actually built all this. And this house is just for storytelling purposes, this wood cabin. Constructed with tools and materials used in 1753. And there it is in all of its glory. So we've got literally this across the street, built shortly after the people were building this stuff. Doesn't make sense. I think the people that built this stuff showed up to all that rock stuff, because that rock stuff can easily sit there for hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years. And then if you keep walking a little ways, just down in that same center section where this cabin's at, there's a war memorial. made out of this old rock. And again, this is where like I've come across a few of these now where they're just unique design rock structures like this, and then they turn them into war memorials. But I really think, you know, this is just part of this whole castle kingdom here, and maybe this was some sort of water reservoir or fountain or something like that. I don't know, but I think again it's just repurposed and renamed as some sort of memorial. There's also this building, which I don't know, looked a lot newer to me, but maybe it's not, or maybe newer sections have been added onto it, because I could see this brick being quite a bit older, but pretty cool looking building. This one's just, wow, this one blew my mind. Look at all that rock, and again with that huge rose window right there, perfectly encircled. And yeah, like this rock work's so cool. It's very different than like a super polished, clean look. It's like really, it's got a kind of a rough and jagged feel to it, but perfect. Like look how perfectly surrounded that window is. All these arches on these tall stained glass windows. And the tower right here, flat on top, which means whatever was on top of it has been taken down. And you can see right here, if you look to the right of the building, it actually continues a bit more. And again, I just think a lot of it buried. I think literally this doorway right here was just a window, or even just like an air window as part of this tower. And this is literally the tippity top of a really, really tall tower, but that's now our entrance. And here I tried to get a shot so you can see how just the rock work, how you can see how rugged the whole thing is. I mean, I shoot a cannonball at that. I think it just bounces off, honestly. Fire's not gonna do anything to this. Char it a little bit, but integrity-wise, yeah, this thing is super, super strong and durable. As a castle, as a fortress should be and would be. And then this section was really interesting. They've got these laid out right here, kind of showing us how big and heavy and massive some of these white marble stones are, that some of these buildings were constructed out of. That, they say this is all just naturally under these mountains or whatever, but no, this is what a whole bunch of this was built out of. And like I said, I'm going to show you a canal, a dam and canal that is completely made out of this beautiful marble. And look at the arches. Look how big the arches are on this building right here. Just huge arches right there. And when we look at this art depiction here, we see a knight on a horse in armor. Again, that's a completely different time period. Ain't like much older than Cowboys, and Cowboys would have no business doing that by hand on these buildings. Right there we see a ship with sails and an owl on the sail, because anciently they were a much more seafaring people. Literally, our ancient ancestors that built this stuff, they built rock castle kingdoms and fortresses, and they were knights and warriors and that type of thing because they wanted to maintain independent kingdoms, and there were other people that were trying to attack them and overthrow and conquer. And so that's why we see all that depicted on all of this stuff. And our cowboys in the 1800s, 1700s, early 1900s, that's not how they lived. They had nothing to do with any of that. This was just all sitting here. And then that church with the huge tower on it, here's a look at it from the backside, and it's even more like, oh, what the heck is this thing actually? Because look how big this is, and crazy design on the back. And then it's got this huge rock wall sitting behind it, which I say huge, very buried. And just look at the archway on this church. This is on the big tower. Again, I don't believe this is even a door, an actual entrance. And like a perfectly accurate head and another one placed up there. Again, this is, the ancients did this stuff, and you can't make those faces. Like there's no way that they're just chiseling this all out by hand. And then I also came across this church right here, which was really cool. And the tower, this archway right here, got to walk through it and take a look at the inside of it just to see what was up. And just very cool. I mean, very buried, but really cool to just go in there and see what it was looking like, and all the different arches. Like that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, 5 or 6 different arches that bring you into that one piece. Tower right here is something, you know, its steeple or whatever has been stripped off the top, but very, very old stone, leftover architecture. Super cool. And this is a look at that cemetery that I was visiting. And this is really interesting. You know, you got this old stone wall and then an entrance right there, like into this little mountain. They're dating it to 1865. And then I saw this, and I saw that I could actually get kind of close to it, actually get inside of it. So I did, and it was really interesting what I found. So first of all, wow, when it comes to brickwork. I mean, just look here at the bottom. First of all, just perfectly stacked. And then all the different angles that are on it right there. But then coming off, shooting off of it is a perfectly round, super, super tall tower.